What if the person you trusted with your child was the very one who took her life? What if the last time you saw your baby, kissed her soft little cheeks, and whispered, "I love you," you had no idea that it would be the last time? No idea that the person you thought you could trust, the one who should have loved her more than anything, would be the reason she never wakes up. That's exactly what happened to Sophia Harper. She handed over her baby girl for a routine visit with her father. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just another night. She smiled, kissed her daughter goodbye, and walked away, believing she'd see her again in the morning. But by sunrise, her entire world had shattered. 9-month-old Lily Harper didn't wake up. She didn't giggle that morning. She didn't reach for her favorite stuffed bunny. She didn't cry for her mama. Because sometime in the night, the very man who was supposed to love her, protect her, and keep her safe, stole her last breath. The details of what happened inside that apartment will make your stomach turn. The betrayal will haunt you. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of carelessness. This was cold. Calculated. Unforgivable. And the worst part? No one saw it coming. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. They don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes, they smile at you. Sometimes, they shake your hand. Sometimes, they hold a baby in their arms and swear they love her. Imagine being that mother. Imagine standing in front of a tiny coffin, knowing that you put your baby in the hands of the man who took her life. Imagine the weight of that guilt, that pain, that horror. Sophia Harper will never have to imagine it. She's living it. What happened to Lily Harper? What really went on inside that apartment? And, could this have been stopped? Stick with us as we uncover the chilling details of this case. And if you love gripping true crime stories, the kind that make you feel something, that make you question everything, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Lily Harper never got a chance to grow up. At just 9 months old, she was at the very beginning of her life, her world still so small, so simple. She had just learned to sit up on her own, her tiny fingers reaching for anything within her grasp. She giggled when her mother blew raspberries on her belly. She clapped her hands when she heard her favorite lullaby. And she loved her stuffed bunny. It wasn't just a toy, it was her comfort, her security. Whenever she was scared, she held it tight. Whenever she was sleepy, she curled up next to it. That bunny was always with her. Until the night she died. Her mother, Sophia Harper, called her little light. Because that's what Lily was, pure, radiant joy in the form of a baby girl. A happy, bubbly child, full of life, full of love. She never cried for long because Sophia was always right there, picking her up, holding her close, whispering, "Mama's got you." Sophia had built her entire world around her daughter. She was just 24 years old, balancing the exhausting reality of single motherhood with a job at a local bakery. She woke up before dawn, kneaded dough with tired hands, and decorated cakes with an artist's precision. And even when she came home exhausted, covered in flour and icing, she never let that exhaustion stop her from being the best mother she could be. She loved Lily more than anything. And she wanted to believe, needed to believe, that Lily's father, Ethan Harper, loved her too. Ethan was 28 years old, a mechanic who spent his days fixing engines and his nights keeping to himself. To those who knew him, he was quiet. Reserved. The kind of guy who didn't say much at parties but never seemed like the kind of person to fear. He wasn't the life of the room, but he wasn't a threat either. Just, there. But behind closed doors, Ethan was a different man. He had a temper, a dangerous one. He didn't explode in public, but when he was alone, when things didn't go his way, when he felt like he was losing control, he lashed out. And Sophia knew it. She had seen his anger before. The way his voice would drop to something cold and sharp when he got frustrated. The way his hands would clench into fists at the slightest inconvenience. The way he'd punch walls, throw things, storm out of the room when he couldn't handle his own emotions. She had been afraid of him. Not always. But enough. Enough to know that she couldn't stay with him. Enough to know that she had to get out. So she left. But even though she walked away from their relationship, she didn't walk away from his role as Lily's father. Because despite everything, despite the fights, despite the tension, despite the red flags she tried so hard to ignore, she wanted to believe he would be a good dad. She wanted to believe that even if he had failed her as a partner, he wouldn't fail their daughter. She wanted to believe that he would never hurt Lily. She was wrong. Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors at night. It was the kind of town where neighbors waved at each other from their porches, where kids rode their bikes down quiet streets, where the biggest scandal was who got caught cheating at the annual bake-off. Crime was rare. Murder was unheard of. This was the kind of town where people trusted each other. Where they believed that the people around them, the people they grew up with, the people they worked with, the people they had known their whole lives, were good. But evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes, it lives right next door. Sometimes, it looks like a father rocking his baby to sleep. Sometimes, it hides behind the walls of a quiet apartment, waiting for the moment when no one is watching. No one in Willow Creek saw this coming. Not the neighbors who heard nothing that night. Not the first responders who arrived to find a father sobbing on the floor, cradling his baby's lifeless body. Not even Sophia, who had spent months trying to convince herself that Ethan would never hurt their daughter. But Lily Harper never had a chance. Because the moment Sophia walked away that night, leaving her baby in Ethan's arms, Lily's fate was already sealed. The night was quiet, the kind of crisp autumn evening where the world feels still. A gentle breeze rattled the trees, and the streetlights flickered outside the small apartment complex where Ethan Harper lived alone. Inside, Lily Harper slept, or at least, that's what the world believed. Just a few hours earlier, Sophia Harper had pulled into the parking lot, unbuckled her baby girl from the car seat, and carried her up the narrow flight of stairs to apartment 2B. It was supposed to be just another night. A simple drop-off. A routine visit with her father. Nothing unusual. Nothing to fear. Sophia held Lily close, inhaling the soft, sweet scent of her baby's hair. She rocked her gently, whispering little words of love as she carried her up the stairs. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last time she would ever hold her daughter alive. Ethan opened the door, standing in the dim hallway with an expression that was unreadable. His face gave nothing away. Sophia looked into his eyes, searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe warmth, but she found nothing. Still, she handed Lily over. And for a brief moment, Lily hesitated. She turned her face toward her mother's chest, clutching onto her with her tiny hands. That small moment, that tiny, fragile hesitation, would haunt Sophia for the rest of her life. Because deep down, she would always wonder. Did Lily know? Did she sense the danger? Did she feel, in some way, that this night would end differently? Sophia kissed her baby girl one last time. "Mommy loves you." And then, she left. Sophia was dead asleep when her phone rang. She jolted awake, her heart pounding as she reached blindly for the device on her nightstand. Unknown caller. She frowned, squinting at the screen. Who would be calling at this hour? Then, suddenly, a sickening thought hit her. Lily. Before she could even process the fear bubbling inside her, she swiped to answer. Hello. The voice on the other end was frantic. Breathless. Shaking. Sophia, Sophia. Something's wrong, Lily's not, she's not breathing. The world stopped. For a moment, everything froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her lungs locked up, her body stiffened with terror. What? What are you talking about? Ethan's voice was ragged, his words tumbling out in a chaotic mess. I woke up and, she's not moving. She's not, oh my God, Sophia, she's cold, she's not breathing. The phone slipped from her hands. Sophia's stomach twisted, a scream rising in her throat, but no sound came out. She grabbed the phone again, hands shaking violently. Did you call 911? Yes, yes. They're coming. Oh my God, Sophia, she didn't wait to hear the rest. She was already out the door. Still in her pajamas, barefoot, she ran to her car, fumbling with the keys, her entire body trembling with terror. The drive to Ethan's apartment was a blur. Her hands were so slick with sweat, she could barely grip the steering wheel. Her chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself, her breathing ragged, her mind screaming no, this can't be happening. She didn't remember pulling into the parking lot. Didn't remember running up the stairs. Didn't remember throwing open the door. All she remembered was the sight that greeted her. The apartment was a disaster. Ethan was on the floor, his hands in his hair, rocking back and forth. His face was pale, his eyes wild with panic. And in front of him, Lily. Lifeless. Sophia collapsed to her knees, a wretched, broken sob tearing from her throat. No. She scrambled forward, grabbing her baby, shaking her gently, begging her to wake up. Lily, baby, wake up. Please, wake up. But Lily didn't move. Her skin was cold. Her lips were blue. And that's when Sophia noticed something else. Something that didn't make sense. There was no sign of vomit. No sign of distress. Just, stillness. As if someone had silenced her. Minutes later, paramedics rushed in. Sophia was pulled away, her screams echoing in the apartment as the EMTs worked on Lily. But deep down, she already knew. Her baby was gone. She turned toward Ethan, her entire body shaking with rage and devastation. What happened? She screamed. Ethan's face was pale, his breathing uneven. I don't know, I put her to sleep, and when I woke up, she was like that. Sophia's head spun. That didn't make sense. Lily was a healthy baby. She had never had breathing problems. She had never been sick. And then, she saw it. A small mark on Lily's neck. Barely visible. Faint. But there. And suddenly, Sophia's blood ran cold. She turned to Ethan, really looked at him. His hands were trembling. His shirt was soaked in sweat. And his eyes, those dark, vacant eyes, held something she couldn't place. Guilt. Fear. A secret. Something was very, very wrong. The paramedics did everything they could, but Lily was pronounced dead at the scene. Sophia collapsed, wailing, her entire world shattering around her. Ethan. He sat on the couch, silent. The police arrived soon after, and that's when things started unraveling. The first officer on the scene took one look at Lily's body, then at Ethan. Something felt off. Something about the way he stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact. Something about the nervous way he rubbed his hands together. And then, the mark on Lily's neck. The officer's expression shifted. From concern, to suspicion. The official cause of death was still unknown. But already, things weren't adding up. Lily didn't just stop breathing. She didn't just die in her sleep. Something happened to her. And as investigators started piecing together the events of that night, they uncovered disturbing details. Details that would shatter the illusion of a tragic accident. Because what happened to Lily Harper was no accident at all. What did the autopsy reveal? What did investigators find inside that apartment? And what dark secret had Ethan Harper been hiding? Stay with us, because the truth behind this case is even more horrifying than you can imagine. It took 3 days before the results of Lily Harper's autopsy were released. 3 days of pure agony for Sophia. 3 days of silence from Ethan. 3 days where the entire town of Willow Creek held its breath, waiting for an answer, hoping for something, anything, that would make sense of what had happened. But when the report finally came back, there was no comfort in it. Because what it revealed wasn't an accident. It was a crime. A cold-blooded act of violence against an innocent baby girl. The official cause of death. Suffocation. But not just any suffocation, forced suffocation. Lily hadn't just stopped breathing on her own. Someone had made sure she couldn't. There were ligature marks around her neck, small but undeniable, evidence that something had been wrapped around her throat. Something that had cut off her air, slowly, methodically, deliberately. The medical examiner also found bruises on her tiny arms and ribs, injuries that were fresh, injuries that pointed to one horrific truth: Lily had struggled. She had fought. And in those final moments, those last, desperate seconds before the darkness closed in, she had been terrified. But she was only 9 months old. She was too small, too helpless. She never stood a chance. The findings didn't stop there. Further examination revealed something even more gut-wrenching: evidence of previous injuries. Tiny fractures that had already started healing, bruises that were weeks old, subtle but clear signs that Lily had been hurt before. Which meant this wasn't the first time. This wasn't a single moment of rage. This wasn't a tragic accident. Lily had been suffering. And no one knew. Not Sophia. Not the doctors. Not the neighbors who lived just a few feet away. She had been hurting, silently, helplessly, at the hands of the man who was supposed to love her. When the detective sat down with Sophia to explain the results, she barely heard the words. It was like the world had tilted, like everything she knew, everything she trusted, had been ripped away in an instant. She shook her head, over and over, her hands clamped over her mouth, her body trembling as if she could shake off the horror, as if denial could change the truth. No, 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 and no. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might stop. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. That's not possible. He wouldn't, but the evidence was there. Cold. Unforgiving. And when it finally hit her, really hit her, she collapsed. Sobbing, wailing, her hands gripping her chest as if she could physically hold her shattered heart together. She trusted him, she whispered, her voice raw, broken. I trusted him. How? How could she not have seen it? How could she have handed her baby over to a man who did this? The guilt was crushing. It wrapped around her like a vice, tightening with every breath, suffocating her with a grief so deep, so unbearable, that she wondered if she'd ever be able to breathe again. I let her go. I let her go, and I didn't know. I didn't know. She would spend the rest of her life hating herself for it. The news spread like wildfire. In a town like Willow Creek, something like this didn't just happen. A father killing his own baby. People couldn't wrap their heads around it. No, not Ethan, some said. That doesn't make sense. There must be some mistake. But there wasn't. And as the details of the autopsy became public, the bruises, the fractures, the ligature marks, the town's confusion turned to horror. Neighbors who had seen Ethan walk Lily in a stroller now felt sick. Friends who had laughed with him, shared beers with him, trusted him now felt betrayed. Mothers who had held their own children a little closer that night, staring at them as they slept, realizing that the unimaginable had happened right in their own town. And no one saw it coming. Ethan Harper had always been quiet, reserved, seemingly harmless. But monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they wear the mask of a father kissing his daughter's forehead. Sometimes, they stand in the grocery store, smiling at cashiers, making small talk, blending in. Sometimes, they convince the world that they are just another man, just another dad. Until the truth rips that mask away. And underneath is something dark, twisted, and utterly unforgivable. With the autopsy results in hand, investigators knew the truth. This was murder. But the question was, why? What drove Ethan Harper to kill his own daughter? What happened inside that apartment in the final moments of Lily's life? And would Ethan finally tell the truth? Because the next step was inevitable. A murder charge. An arrest. And a trial that would shake Willow Creek to its core. What was Ethan hiding? What really happened in the final moments before Lily took her last breath? And how did a town come together to seek justice for a little girl who never got the chance to grow up? Stay with us, because this case is just beginning. From the outside, Ethan Harper was just another man. To the people of Willow Creek, he was quiet, reserved, unremarkable, a man who worked on cars, kept to himself, and lived a life that didn't raise any red flags. But behind closed doors, Ethan wasn't the man he pretended to be. Investigators started digging, and what they found was disturbing. A pattern. A history. A darkness that had been there all along. Ethan had always been controlling. He wasn't the kind of man who lost his temper in public. He didn't scream in the streets, didn't start bar fights, didn't get into trouble. But in his personal life, with his relationships, with the people closest to him, he was a different person. Old friends. Ex-girlfriends. Even former co-workers. They all had stories. Stories about the way Ethan handled frustration. Stories about his temper. One former girlfriend told investigators that Ethan had once thrown a phone across the room in a fit of rage, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had ignored one of his texts for too long. Another said he had once punched a hole in the wall next to her head after a minor argument. A coworker recalled how Ethan had exploded in anger over a small mistake at work, throwing tools across the garage, his face red with fury. One thing became painfully clear: Ethan Harper was a man who couldn't handle losing control. And the night Lily died was the night he snapped. The evidence told a chilling story. Ethan had been alone with Lily for hours that night. At around 9 p.m., a neighbor heard the faint sound of a baby crying through the thin apartment walls. It wasn't unusual, babies cry. But this crying was different. It went on for a long time. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Not gradually. Not like a baby finally soothing itself back to sleep. It just stopped. Forensic evidence would later show that this was the moment Lily Harper died. So what happened? Here's what investigators believed took place inside that apartment. Lily was fussy that night. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe she was teething. Maybe she just wanted her mother. Whatever the reason, she cried. And Ethan snapped. He didn't soothe her. He didn't rock her. He didn't call Sophia for help. Instead, he acted on rage. The pressure of fatherhood. The weight of his failures. The anger he had buried deep inside him. It all boiled over. And in that moment, Ethan Harper made a choice. A choice that ended his daughter's life. Investigators found bloody baby wipes in the trash. Traces of Lily's saliva, mixed with blood, evidence that she had cried so hard she had bitten her own lips. The ligature marks on her neck, small but undeniable, suggested that Ethan had wrapped something around her throat. Something tight. Something that stopped her from breathing. But that wasn't the worst part. The bruises on her arms and ribs. The tiny fractures that had already begun to heal. This wasn't just one night of violence. This was a pattern. A cycle of abuse that no one had seen. And now, Lily was dead because of it. Lily was only 9 months old. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know why the person holding her wasn't comforting her. She struggled. She fought. Her tiny hands grasped at the air, searching for something, someone, to save her. But there was no one there. The man who was supposed to protect her was the one stealing her last breath. And in those final moments, she was afraid. Terrified. And then, there was nothing. Her little hands went limp. Her tiny chest stopped rising. And the world, her world, went silent. Sophia had trusted him. She had believed that even if Ethan had failed her as a partner, he wouldn't fail their daughter. She had thought that Lily was safe. But she wasn't. Because Ethan Harper wasn't just a bad father. He was a murderer. And now, there was no bringing Lily back. With the evidence in front of them, police had one choice. Ethan Harper had to be arrested. But even as the walls closed in, Ethan refused to admit what he had done. He had an excuse for everything. He swore it was an accident. He played the role of a grieving father, insisting that he had simply woken up to find Lily not breathing. But investigators knew better. The evidence didn't lie. And now, it was time for justice. How did investigators finally break Ethan Harper? What did he say when he was confronted with the truth? And what happened when he was put on trial for the murder of his own daughter? Stay with us, because this case is far from over. No words could describe the depth of Sophia Harper's grief. She wasn't just mourning the death of her daughter, she was mourning everything Lily would never get to be. The first steps she would never take. The first words she would never speak. The birthdays that would never come. The bedtime kisses, the giggles, the tiny hands reaching for hers, all gone. One night. One moment. One monstrous act of violence, and everything she had lived for was ripped away. Sophia refused to leave the hospital for hours after Lily's death. She sat in a sterile, white-walled room, holding her baby's cold, lifeless body, rocking her as if she could somehow bring her back. She pressed her cheek to Lily's forehead, whispering over and over again, "I'm so sorry. Mommy's so sorry." Her cries were gut-wrenching. The kind of sounds that don't just come from sadness, but from a soul that has been shattered beyond repair. The nurses had to pry Lily from her arms. And when they did, something in Sophia broke completely. She collapsed onto the floor, her body racked with sobs, screaming out the pain that could never be put into words. "I just want her back." She cried, her voice raw and broken. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve this. The guilt consumed her. How could she have trusted Ethan? How could she have believed, even for a second, that he would keep Lily safe? She played it over and over in her head. The moment she handed Lily over. The way Lily clung to her, hesitating, as if she somehow knew. Why hadn't she listened? Why hadn't she taken her baby and run? But it was too late. And no amount of guilt, no amount of regret, would ever bring Lily back. The news of Lily Harper's death spread like wildfire. Willow Creek was a small town. A town where everyone knew each other, where the idea of murder, especially the murder of a child, was something that belonged in big cities, on the news, far away from their quiet lives. But now, it was their reality. And no one could process it. Neighbors whispered about it in grocery store aisles. Parents held their children a little tighter. And outside Sophia's home, something incredible started happening. People, strangers, friends, families who had never even met Lily, began leaving flowers, stuffed animals, candles, and handwritten notes. A single candle turned into hundreds of flickering flames, glowing in the darkness, each one a symbol of a town's grief, a town's outrage, a town's heartbreak. Someone started a GoFundMe to cover Lily's funeral costs. Within 24 hours, donations poured in. People who had never even met Sophia gave what they could, $10, $20, $100, because they couldn't imagine the pain she was going through. Local businesses put up signs reading, "Justice for Lily." And at night, outside Sophia's home, people gathered, holding candles in silent vigil. Because no one, could understand how a father could do this to his own child. And no one would let Lily be forgotten. Ethan Harper wasn't at the hospital when Lily died. He wasn't there to hold her hand. He wasn't there to comfort Sophia. He was at the police station. And when the autopsy results came back, detectives knew, this wasn't just a tragic accident. This was murder. At 7:13 a.m., just hours after Lily's death was officially ruled a homicide, 2 officers arrived at Ethan's apartment. They knocked once. Then twice. When Ethan finally opened the door, he looked disheveled. Pale. Sweating. As if he already knew what was coming. Ethan Harper. His eyes darted between the officers. "Yeah. You're under arrest for the murder of Lily Harper. Put your hands behind your back." For a moment, he froze. And then, he started crying. Not the kind of grief-stricken, broken sobs of a father who had lost his child. No. The kind of crying that comes from a man who just realized he's been caught. No, wait," Ethan stammered, shaking his head violently, his breathing picking up. It was an accident, I swear," the officers weren't listening. Because the evidence didn't lie. And no one was buying his act. They pulled his hands behind his back, locking cold metal cuffs around his wrists. And as he was led outside, his entire town watched. Neighbors stood on their porches, their eyes filled with disgust, rage, disbelief. Some whispered. Some just stared. But one thing was clear, the man they had once called Ethan was gone. He wasn't just a father. He was a monster. And now, he was finally facing justice. Ethan Harper was behind bars. But his fight wasn't over. He refused to admit the truth. He told lie after lie, twisting his story, making excuses for the unthinkable. But the evidence? The evidence was damning. And when the trial began, Sophia Harper would have to do the unimaginable, she would have to stand in court, face the man who killed her daughter, and fight for justice. What excuse did Ethan Harper try to use? What happened inside the courtroom? And did he finally face the justice he deserved? Stay with us, because this case is far from over. With Ethan Harper in custody, the real work began. Investigators knew what they were dealing with, not just a tragic death, but a murder. Now, they had to prove it. They combed through every piece of evidence, looking for the truth hidden beneath Ethan's web of lies. And what they found would destroy any chance of Ethan walking free. The ligature marks around Lily's neck, clear, unmistakable proof that she had been suffocated. The fractures on her ribs and arms, evidence of ongoing abuse, wounds that were older than the night she died. The bloody baby wipes in the trash, a heartbreaking clue that Lily had been bleeding from her mouth, likely from crying so hard she bit her own lips. The medical examiner left no room for doubt. Lily hadn't just stopped breathing. She hadn't suffocated accidentally. She had been murdered. At first, Ethan stuck to his story. He sat across from detectives, hands shaking, voice cracking as he played the role of the grieving father. "I don't know what happened," he insisted. "I put her down, I went to sleep, and when I woke up, she wasn't breathing." But detectives weren't buying it. Because the evidence told a different story. They confronted him with the autopsy report, the bruises, the signs of past abuse. If this was an accident, one detective pressed, then explain these injuries. Ethan's face went pale. I don't know. Maybe she fell. Maybe, but there was no maybe. The bruises were consistent with force, with being gripped too hard, squeezed, restrained. And when detectives revealed that they had phone records, texts, and statements from people who knew about Ethan's violent tendencies, his story started falling apart. The more he tried to explain, the deeper he dug himself into a hole. And in the end, his silence spoke louder than any excuse. The trial was packed. Reporters. Spectators. Strangers who had followed the case from the moment Lily's story broke. They all wanted to see justice. And at the heart of it all, Sophia Harper. The grieving mother. The woman who had trusted Ethan, who had believed that, despite everything, he wouldn't hurt their child. Now, she had to sit in a courtroom and look him in the eyes. And she had to relive the worst night of her life. When the prosecutor asked her to describe that night, her voice broke before she even spoke. She closed her eyes, swallowing back the sobs that threatened to consume her. I dropped her off, she whispered, voice shaking. She didn't want to go. She held on to me. Tears streamed down her face. I kissed her. I told her I loved her. I thought she'd be safe. The jury sat silent, motionless, many of them visibly shaken. Even the judge's eyes softened. And now, the prosecutor asked gently. Sophia turned toward Ethan, the man sitting just feet away, expression blank, soulless. Her lips trembled, her hands clenched into fists. Now, I don't even have a daughter anymore. A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Because of him. For a moment, the silence was deafening. And in that moment, the jury, and the world, knew. Ethan Harper wasn't just guilty. He was beyond redemption. The prosecutor was merciless. They laid out Ethan's pattern of violence, his inability to control his rage, his history of lashing out. They played 911 audio, letting the jury hear Ethan's fake panic, his forced hysteria, contrasted with the raw, gut-wrenching sobs of Sophia. They brought in forensic experts, detailing how Lily's injuries weren't from a fall, an accident, or sudden infant death syndrome. She had been restrained. Suffocated. Murdered. And Ethan was the only person who had been with her. There was no other explanation. The defense tried to paint Ethan as a stressed father, overwhelmed, not a killer. But no one bought it. Because no amount of stress justified taking a child's life. The jury deliberated for just a few hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. Ethan sat at the defense table, hands clenched, jaw tight. Sophia held on to her mother's hand, her body trembling. The judge turned to the jury foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The air was thick, suffocating, unrelenting. On the charge of capital murder, how does the jury find the defendant? A long pause. And then, guilty. A sharp, collective gasp filled the room. Sophia collapsed into tears. Ethan closed his eyes, his face crumbling. For the first time, reality hit him. He was going to prison. Forever. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom, Ethan Harper, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was done. Justice had been served. But for Sophia? Nothing would ever bring Lily back. Nothing could ever undo what had been done. Ethan Harper would die behind bars. But that wasn't the end of Lily's story. Her memory lived on, in the people who fought for her, in the community that grieved for her, in the mother who would carry her love forever. And in the end, that's what mattered. Lily Harper was gone. But she would never be forgotten. Lily Harper should have had her whole life ahead of her. She should have had first birthdays filled with laughter, scraped knees from learning to run, sleepy bedtime stories with her mother's voice lulling her into dreams. She should have had Christmas mornings, school plays, inside jokes, and teenage adventures. She should have grown up, fallen in love, chased her dreams, and built a life of her own. But instead, she was denied all of it. Because one person, the one person who should have protected her above all else, chose violence over love. And that choice ended her life before it even had a chance to truly begin. Lily's story isn't just tragic. It's a warning. Children are the most vulnerable among us. They rely on the adults in their lives to keep them safe, to be their voices, to fight for them when they cannot fight for themselves. But the truth is, we fail them too often. Lily's story is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked anger, of the danger that lurks behind closed doors, of the monsters who don't always wear masks, but instead, walk among us, pretending to be loving fathers, trusted caregivers, ordinary people. The world is full of stories like Lily's, stories of abuse that went unnoticed, warnings that were ignored, signs that were overlooked until it was too late. And that should haunt all of us. Because the question isn't just, why did this happen? The question is, how do we make sure it never happens again? If you suspected someone close to you was capable of harming a child, what would you do? Would you speak up? Would you trust your instincts? Would you intervene before it was too late? Or would you hesitate, convince yourself that you're overreacting, that it's not your place, that it's none of your business? Because the truth is, silence can be deadly. So many cases like Lily's share one chilling similarity: someone, somewhere, had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. But they said nothing. They assumed. They second-guessed. They waited for proof. And by the time proof arrived, it was in the form of a tragedy that could never be undone. So ask yourself, would you trust your instincts? Would you say something, even if it meant making someone uncomfortable? Would you step in, even when it felt like it wasn't your place? Because that decision, that single choice to act or to stay silent, could mean the difference between life and death. Lily Harper was more than a victim. She was a baby girl who deserved better. She was a life full of potential, a soul filled with love, a child who should have been protected. And though she is gone, we can keep her memory alive. By speaking her name. By telling her story. By never forgetting. And most importantly, by fighting for the children who still have a chance. Because no child should ever feel fear in the arms of the person who should love them the most. No child should ever have to suffer in silence. No child should ever be let down by the people who are supposed to keep them safe. Lily deserved so much more. And now, it's up to us to make sure that no other child suffers the way she did. Lily's story is one we should never have to tell. But by sharing it, by remembering her, by demanding justice, we ensure that her life meant something. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something deep inside, don't stay silent. Speak up. Fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And if you believe in spreading awareness about cases like Lily's, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Shocking True Crime Exposed. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think could have been done differently to save Lily? What warning signs should we never ignore? And how can we, as a society, do better? If you want to hear more stories that deserve to be told, check out our playlist on heartbreaking true crime cases. And most importantly, remember Lily Harper. Because every child deserves to feel safe and loved. Somewhere out there, another child is in danger. Another child is crying in the dark, afraid, waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to save them. The question is, will we listen before it's too late?